All right, this is the second week. We're talking about microbiology, and we're talking about the protozoa. And there's 4 different groups within the protozoa. Right now we're going to be talking about Sarcodina, or otherwise known as amoebas. Their major locomotor is their pseudopodia, or false feet, and some might have flagella during their reproductive phases. Most of them are free-living, and so they're not infectious, they're not parasites. But one big exemption from that is Entamoeba histolytica, and that's the only true human pathogen in the group. So they usually form cysts. They have motile parasite in their infective state is in the human intestine. They reproduce by asexual or binary fission, and most common infection is in the lower gastrointestinal tract, but it can go elsewhere. We'll talk about that later. The trophozoite is the actual infective form to humans, not the cyst. The cyst is non-motile and the trophozoite is motile. And it's transmitted by ingestion of a cyst from fecally contaminated food or water. So this is the morphological life cycle of an amoeba. The trophozoite is the active feeding cell, and so that's when it's actually infected the humans. If it is consumed by a human, it'll be digested, but if the cyst is consumed, then it won't be digested, and that's when it can infect your intestines. The trophozoite is much larger than the cyst. The cyst contains 4 nuclei, typically, as far as Entamoeba histolytica is concerned. And 1 nucleus forms 1 trophozoite. So if a trophozoite goes into a cyst and forms 4 nuclei, actually 4 different trophozoites can arise from that in the small intestine. The trophozoite actually eats red blood cells also. So the cyst is dormant. It can survive for periods outside of the host. It's surrounded by a mineral wall that's mostly calcium, and it could possibly have up to 8 nuclei depending upon what species it is. Talk about excistation or excistation. It's excistation. That means cysts can survive in the oral and gastric secretions, but alkaline pH and digestive juices stimulate excistation within 24 hours. So that's how you can eat a cyst and have it grow into a trophozoite in your body, is because when you go into the small intestine, the pH drops. Excuse me, when you go into the stomach and the pH drops. Alkaline pH. When you go into the small intestine and the pH drops, then that causes the cyst to transform to a trophozoite. And encystation is just the opposite of that. It's the trophozoite going into the cyst form in difficult conditions. So these are some of the infective amoebas. The first one, like we talked about, Entamoeba histolytica. It's also called amoebic dysentery in human and other primates. 90% of the people who contract it don't have any kind of symptoms, and it has a very simple life cycle. So it goes through all the trophozoite and cyst stages that we talked about earlier. The pathogenesis and control of E. histolytica is the trophozoites attached to the mucus of the cecum in the large intestine with their pseudopods. That's where the maturation and reproduction will happen. And most of the time, the reason that you see very few people having any kind of symptoms from it is because it doesn't invade beyond the most superficial epithelium of the intestine, most of the time. The severity of the infection is related to 4 different things. The virulence of the parasite, so how pathogenic is it to humans? The inoculation size, how many actual trophozoites are living in your body? The normal flora, if there's an imbalance of the good bacteria in your intestine, then that creates space, and therefore the trophozoite can actually grab hold and gain a foothold in your intestine. And then the host resistance, that's the most important factor. If you have good resistance, then chances are you won't give the trophozoite a chance to gain hold in your intestine. So for clinical, it's hard to pronounce this, clinical amoebiasis, there's 2 different kinds. There's intestinal and extraintestinal. So for the intestine, it targets the cecum, appendix, colon, and rectum. And it secretes an enzyme that dissolves the tissues and leaves small ulcerations that are flask-shaped. The symptoms are abdominal pain, fever, diarrhea, fatigue, and bloody dysentery and weight loss. The life-threatening complications are hemorrhage, appendicitis, and sometimes tumor-like growths. So the extraintestinal infection is amoebic hepatitis. So that basically attacks your liver cells, and basically that leads to symptoms of having an enlarged liver, fever, chills, and leukocytosis. You can also get pulmonary amoebiasis by direct penetration of the diaphragm to get to the lungs, so it goes from the liver and it can even penetrate the diaphragm and then get up into the lungs. Less frequently, it'll invade the spleen, kidney, skin, and the brain. A chronic infection may last for years, and it's often spread by contact of chronic but healthy carriers, so a lot of times they don't know they have it. And the protection against it, E. histolytica will provoke antibody formation, but none really appear to relieve the symptoms or prevent reinfection. Prevention and control, you must improve the environmental and food sanitation. So water treatment includes chlorination, boiling, iodine, or filtration. All of those will clean the water. Treatment of the carriers, combination of amoebicidal drugs, idaquinol and metronidazole. I don't know what that word is. Surgical removal of the diseased tissue happens in extreme cases. All right, so the next one that we're going to talk about is Naegleria fowleri, and the characteristic is that it's a free-living amoeba, so it's not typically a parasite. It's normally found among waterfowls. It's abundant in standing fresh water and swimming pools and hot tubs even. In animal, it causes an intestinal infection with diarrhea or dysentery. It can also cause in humans primary acute meningoencephalitis. And the trophozoite is very small and flask-shaped and moves by a single broad pseudopod. So primary acute meningoencephalitis is an infection that begins through the nasal passage as a result of swimming or diving, and chlorine will kill the pathogen. So the life cycle, the amoeba form enters through the nasal mucosa. That's where it multiplies, and then it migrates to the olfactory nerve. From there, it can actually cross the cribriform plate and enter the brain and meninges. From there, there's rapid destruction of the brain and spinal tissues, and it can result in hemorrhage and coma, and then finally death, and that can all occur within 1 week. Acanthamoeba, that's another group. It also has the exact same characteristics as N. fowleri, except that it enters the body through contact with the eyes instead of the nasal passage. The symptoms include headache and cold-like symptoms, and diagnosis is very difficult, and treatment is only effective if you can catch the infection early. Okay, the second group that we're going to talk about is mastigophorans, or more commonly called the flagellata. So that's the second group of protozoans. The first group that we talked about was amoeba. So its characteristics, motility is primarily by a flagella. Some have actually the pseudopods, but not many. Reproduction is sexual and asexual, and they can be either free-living or parasitic. They inhabit the gastrointestinal tract, the atria, which means any opening in the human, the mouth, vagina, or urethra, bloodstream, and tissues of humans. Most species form cysts and are free-living, but some are parasite in human pathogens. So, the first one that we're going to talk about in this group is Trichomonas vaginalis. So the reservoir is the human urogenital tract, pathogen of the reproductive tract that causes STDs called trichomoniasis. Okay, so symptoms and signs in females is basically a vaginal discharge and urinary frequency and pain. Persistent vaginal inflammation causes tenderness, edema, and swelling. And for males, it is asymptomatic infection. So if you have it for many, many years, it can lead to proctitis. But other than that, a lot of males don't know that they have it. Symptomatic infection means recurring urethritis with milky discharge and prostate infection. Majority of infected males are asymptomatic carriers. Transmission and diagnosis. Transmission is by sexual intercourse. There's no protective cyst, So basically, you have to have it. The trophozoites on the genitals already in the trophozoite form to be able to transmit it to someone else. Life cycle: intercourse is the method of infection. The trophozoite then lives in the vagina, the urethra, the epididymis, and the prostate, and that is the diagnostic and infective stage. Distribution is worldwide. All right, so the second one that we're going to talk about is Trichomonas tenax. It is small and it resides in the oral cavity. It's actually part of the normal flora, but it's an opportunistic pathogen. So it only causes pathology in the immunocompromised individuals. Other than that, it's very, very similar to T. vaginalis. All right, the third one that we're going to talk about is Giardia lamblia. It's most common intestinal flagellate parasite located in clinical specimens in the USA, and it's the most common type of parasite that pollutes drinking water. It's one of the causes of traveler's diarrhea and giardiasis. The reservoir is human and animals. It has the exact same life cycle as that of Entamoeba histolytica, and basically after 24 hours of the ingestation of the cyst, the trophozoites can form. They'll do that in the jejunum, where they then start to feed and multiply. The symptoms are abdominal pain, diarrhea, and muscular weakness. Prolonged heavy infection may result in malabsorption. Asymptomatic in 30% of the infected individuals due to the state of immunity. Transmission and diagnosis: trophozoites and cysts can be found in feces, contaminated food or water, and human carriers can be a source. The trophozoites can be identified in stool specimens for diagnosis, and they can be diagnosed because the trophozoite has a very unique symmetrical heart shape, and the organelles are positioned such that they resemble a face, with 2 nuclei and 4 pairs of flagella. The factors related to recent outbreak or cross-contamination of water, sewer, or wild animals. And that is it for week 2 microbiology.